hope that you can hear me today. This is the second of our Eden stories. Um, we've got Joe Clements from Lowther Estates here and tell us about the land management schemes underway, which is going to be fascinating. And I know he's got some incredible video of the animals, which I think are very elusive. So I think to get the video was impressive. Um, My name's Chris James. I started with the Eden Rivers Trust in July of this year on the Access to Eden project, and it's funded through the Heritage Lottery Fund. Um, Basically, £2.6 million fund to run this project over the next 4 years. I'll give you a few words about the project before we kick off, but a few logistics for today. If you're tuning in, you won't be on screen. Your audio won't be enabled, so it's completely anonymous. So don't be thinking about that. It's just going to be me and Joe on screen today. During his talk, you'll have the opportunity to post questions, type questions in with the Q&A facilities at the bottom of your screen, which you should have. Do feel free to type as many questions as you like. We'll see how much time we've got at the end of Joe's talk, and we'll get through as many as we can. You can use the, what are they called? The subtitles we've got at the bottom there too. So if you want the words on screen, if you need to be seeing those, then there's a CC option. Click on that. It lets you edit how the words appear. It's pretty good, it's pretty accurate. So if you want to follow with the subtitles, that's great. You can do that too. That's easy enough to do. You'll see a CC option. So just click on that and use that if you want to do that. And I think that's about it, really. We'll have a quick, probably about 40 minutes from Joe, maybe less, maybe a bit more. And whatever time we've got left at the end, we'll do a Q&A. I'm going to record the session, so we'll make that available to you next week. So if you miss any, you can catch up. But feel free to share that too. If you've enjoyed today's talk, please do share that amongst colleagues and friends. The more people that see it, the better. And that will be up for the interim, really. And we think these talks will probably form part of the legacy of this project, which, when it comes to an end, we want to get a good collection of these together just to sort of, position ourselves back where we started and what's happened in the intervening years, really. So, as I said, 5 minutes from me. Then we have Joe, the main feature, and then we'll grill him with a few questions. So the Access to Eden project, it's a 4-year project, partnership project led by Eden Rivers Trust. We've got some larger partners of Cumbria Wildlife Trust and the North Pennines National Landscapes and the Yorkshire Dales National Park Authority, the main leads, plus, a plethora of local organisations like Access the Dales, Waverley Viaduct Trust, Cumbria County Council, lots. So, I mean, the beauty is that we involve everyone, we involve communities, and we involve people that live here to make it work and a tangible thing that we deliver. It's entitled Breaking Barriers and Building Bridges. So it's about getting people to explore the Eden catchment. It's giving people access by making pathways available. It's improving the habitat for wildlife. It's celebrating the culture, giving people more information about the area and making it easier for them to explore, to volunteer, to give up their time to help, and just to spread the word about the work that's being done. There'll be some capital projects like river wiggling to actually give us better resilience against climate incidents. 8 doorstep sites across the catchment, which will get kind of special treatment. So we've got city centre ones at Engine, Lonning and Petrel Vale in Carlisle, where we'll be encouraging more volunteering, doing invasive control, putting new pathways in, a lot of interpretation about the history of those places, and really getting community involvement there, which is really well underway already since April this year when the project kicked off. So that will be ongoing. and those doorstep sites marked on the map there across the catchment. Um, and it's just about engaging people really to get involved with whether that is invasive control or volunteering, tree planting, and or just getting out for walks in the area and actually celebrating what the catchment has to offer. So this these talks are kind of funded through that project, which is why we're just touching on it here now. But I've just all I need to say on it really, I'd say during Joe's talk, do remember to submit your questions. I'm sure there will be some coming up based on what he's got to talk about. I'm really interested to hear an update on what's going on there because I know it's quite a unique scheme that Joe's working on. So I'm really interested to see, probably the rationale for doing it and the outcomes so far. So I'll stop sharing my screen now, Joe. If you'd want to share yours, that would be grand.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Chris. That's a really interesting tip about the access to read and stuff, actually, because I kind of heard a bit about it a few times, but nice to have the overview and see a little map of it all. So yeah, I'm just gonna before we get too far into this, I should just fully qualify to everyone that I'm not an expert on beavers particularly. I'm quite new to working with them really. We've had the beavers here at Lowther for since 2020 now. I started with the estate in 2022, at the beginning of 2022. So yeah, I've been working with them for a couple of years now, and it's been really interesting time. I've learned a lot about them, and hopefully today I can just give you, I guess a bit of a background of what we're doing at Lowther and how the beavers fit into that. And hopefully just give you a bit more kind of basic information about about beavers, about their kind of um, their lives, and what they get up to, their kind of interactions with people, and the benefits of having beavers back in the landscape. A bit about the kind of management of beavers, and hopefully, yeah, just give you that kind of some of that kind of information and a bit of our kind of experience with beavers here at Lowther as well. So yeah, that's pretty much just summing it up there. It's nice to look at some photos of beavers because they're obviously it's not something you come across very regularly in the UK. And even though we've got them on the estate here, I was just saying to Chris before we started, they're very elusive. I've actually never seen the beavers here apart from when we've released them. They're extremely elusive, and we monitor them on camera traps, but I've never managed to creep up on one in the enclosure where they live and see them with my own eyes. They're really elusive. But anyway, hopefully there'll be more beavers in the landscape in the future, and we'll see lots more of them. So yeah, just crack on with this. So yeah, just to share a little bit of the context about the estate as well, just to sort of set the scene of how we've ended up with beavers in the first place. About kind of 4 or 5 years ago now, we kind of made a big change in land management on the estate, and the basis of that was that our kind of farming practices were not really working particularly well for us anymore. Like many kind of farm businesses in this part of the world, where it's quite marginal land, and with a kind of backdrop of declining payments for farmland, we weren't doing well as a farm business. We were losing money every year. The employment on the farm, on the home farm, on the estate, had gone down and down and down and down, and it was down to about 3 people, I think. And it was, it wasn't a healthy farm business. And then there was kind of opportunity presented to us. Natural England were really keen that we should get involved in some more kind of environmental stewardship on the estate. And we started off kind of reverting some arable fields that were really bad arable fields. They were by the river on steep slopes, and they would just shed loads of soil into the river when it rained, and they were just terrible arable fields. We started off by kind of reverting some of them to pasture, making sure that there was, that they weren't going to be an environmental disaster in quite the same way. There's soil cover year round. And then they wanted us to get into more ambitious schemes than that. So we started planting wood pasture, which is great from Natural England's point of view because it's quite easy to undo arable reversion. You can just plough up your field again at the end of the period if you want to. But wood pasture is really rare habitat, and really valuable for wildlife. And you can't just undo it in the same way. So it's a great thing for them to encourage people into, and it's great for us. And it's a great way to transition from a really intensively farmed landscape into one that offers more variety of habitat and opportunities for species. Because you still got most of the land is still open kind of pasture. You can still graze animals, but you're getting a hell of a lot of trees and scrub into the landscape as well. So it's a brilliant step forward. And as part of that, we also did a lot of work around our wetlands. So you can see on this photo here, it shows the River Lowther and its kind of floodplain in the bottom of the valley. And this is kind of the result of many years of blocking drains, reconnecting the river to its floodplain, and all kind of interventions to restore the natural hydrology of the site. So that was a really big, ambitious bit of work in the first few years to kind of try and bring this wetland back to life. And then a part of that has been bringing in the beavers, basically. So the beavers are producing a lot of the kind of wetland habitats. They're producing a lot of the water that's kind of charging this wetland. They're doing a brilliant job. So my role here is just kind of general kind of conservation management. So I'm really getting involved in a lot of the practical conservation work. So it's looking after all these trees we've planted on the estate. We've planted about 500,000 trees. They all need aftercare. I'm sure we've all walked past trees that haven't been well looked after being planted. So I'm trying to do as good a job of that as possible. Make sure that they're all looked after and they all make it through to maturity, and all the kind of plastic guards and everything. Make sure that they're cleared up and kind of recycled, and that all happens. There's a lot of work we're doing around wildflower meadows, and kind of restoring floral diversity. A lot of work around wetlands. And then there's some work around kind of species as well, so reintroducing lost species, and the beavers are a big part of that. This is kind of quite typical of what the estate looks like now. I'll just whiz through this because we'll get on to the beavers, but you can see there's been a lot of trees gone in into this landscape in these fenced off compartments in these little wooden crates, and we're grazing a lot of native breed cattle, longhorn cattle, and we've got some ponies and pigs as well. And there they are at work. So this is quite typical of the scene you'll see on the estate if you visit now. We're trying to recreate these kind of healthy habitats on the dry areas of the estate with the cattle and pigs, something more like a kind of natural ecosystem, and there's a lot of tree planting gone on too. So that kind of sets the scene. So now we'll get onto the beavers. So I'll just give you a little bit of a introduction to beavers, just in case any of you don't know an awful lot about them. So we'll talk a bit about their characteristics and then a bit about their distribution and the kind of story of beavers in the UK, beavers in Europe. So our beaver that we have in the UK is the Eurasian beaver. So there's two species of beaver that are still with us today. So there's the Eurasian beaver and there's the North American beaver. And they're generally quite separate in their distributions. We'll come on to that in a minute. They're completely kind of unrelated. They can't hybridize or anything. They've got a different kind of chromosome count. So it's a different species that we've got over here in Europe. And you can see here. I mean, one thing that I think a lot of people are quite surprised by is how big they are. So you can see here that they're well over 4 feet long. And getting on for half a meter high. They're quite a big animal. Certainly they can be. And when you actually see them, it is really captivating because we're not really used to seeing big wild animals very often in England. Maybe a deer occasionally or something, but it is magical to see a beaver. I think that it'll be great when they're more common, and it's an experience that everyone can have when they're out and about walking by the river. So you can see they've got webbed hind feet. They've got this big paddle-like tail, they've actually got two layers of fur. So they've got a kind of outer layer and an inner layer. So to kind of give them both insulation against the cold, but also kind of waterproofing as well. That pelt with that kind of really fine kind of hair is one of the things that's led to them being really threatened in the past. They were hunted really extensively, both here and in North America, because their pelts, their fur is so brilliant and it's really valuable. They're also used for a product called castoreum, which they produce. And also there was this thing that the Pope decided that beavers were similar enough to fish that they could be eaten, I think, during Lent or on a Friday or maybe both. So that led to a lot of hunting of beavers as well, because people could eat beaver when it was the day you're meant to be eating fish. So they came under a huge amount of persecution and really, quite close to extinction, which is quite amazing, really, for such a kind of, I'd say, quite a resilient species. Really, that's quite, it can really, make its own habitat to an extent, and it's got pretty basic needs in life. It just needs water and trees to eat. Really, it's amazing that it got pushed so close to the brink. So it's also worth pointing out that it's got these big orange teeth in its mouth, hence the name of the talk, iron teeth. They do actually have iron in their teeth. They're the only rodent that has iron in its teeth. That gives them a lot of strength. I think some of the rodents have got magnesium in their teeth for strength, but beavers have got iron. So that's why they've got this orangey color. And yeah, there's just a few facts on that. I think that's covered quite a few there. So yeah, that just gives you a bit of an overview. And then just talking a little bit about distribution, I think this is a really interesting map. So you can see that the kind of dark grey color is the historic distribution of beavers in the 12th century. You can see that they're all across the UK there, and they're very widespread across Europe and into Asia. And then they've come under this huge period of persecution over the centuries. And you can see that in the 20th century, we were down to these really small relic populations. So, there's some there in Eastern Europe, 290, 70 along this river in Russia, 100 in the south of Norway, 200 in Germany, and 30 in France. So, down to really, really low numbers and really populations that are probably on the brink of being genetically viable to continue the species. So, they were pushed really, really really far. It's not hard to see how we've lost so many other species and that have gone extinct, when something like a beaver is struggled so much. Interestingly, there's also this bizarre population of North American beavers in Finland, which I didn't know about actually until I started preparing for this talk, and I found this great map and I was reading all about it. So there's this population in Finland and also a small population in the kind of very far east of Russia of North American beavers, and they've been introduced there by people. So after beavers were lost, they opted to bring in some North American beavers rather than Eurasian ones. I think maybe at the time people didn't realize that they were different. However, they've realized since they're actually quite different. They don't look very different or behave that differently, but they've got a different chromosome number. So they can't interbreed, which is good for there's no danger of them kind of hybridizing and a hybrid beaver kind of becoming the main one. But the main problem is that the North American beaver, I think, reproduces at a slightly faster rate than the Eurasian beaver. So over time, they're quite likely to replace them in habitat. So they are classed as an invasive species in the south of Finland. It's kind of strange situation. The ones in the far east of Russia are like separate populations. They can't physically, geographically get to each other, but there is a crossover in the south of Finland where I think the North American beavers are slowly replacing the Eurasian beavers over time. So it's not ideal. And then if you look at the UK, you can see that there's some little green blobs, which is where beavers have started to make a comeback. Beavers have been reintroduced to pretty much every country in Europe, since they've gone extinct, and we're really kind of lagging behind massively everyone else in Europe. They definitely got their challenges, but generally speaking, most of the countries have brought them back and are, finding a way to live alongside them. But things have happened here, mainly through some people would say illegal or kind of unofficial releases. Beavers have kind of crept back into Great Britain. There have been a number of kind of officially sanctioned reintroductions in Scotland and England since the kind of 90s, early 2000s. But there've also been, yeah, a lot of unofficial kind of releases. And most notably for us in England, there was a kind of free living population of beavers which were discovered living on the river Otter in Devon. I think in about maybe 2012 or something like that, maybe. They discovered that the people locally knew about it, but it became kind of suddenly like sort of public knowledge that there were these beavers living on the River Otter, and they've been there for a while. And I think then there was kind of a big question mark about them, about whether they would be allowed to stay or whether they would have to go. And in the end, I think through kind of a good case being put forward, quite a lot of pressure from kind of wildlife trusts and other environmental NGOs, the decision was made that DEFRA would trap the beavers, they'd health screen them to make sure they weren't carrying any nasty diseases or anything, and then they'd re-release them onto the river with some other beavers as well, to make sure there was enough genetic diversity for the beginning of a population. And they would use it as a trial for 5 years to see whether, how it worked, how we managed to deal with it. And I think that my understanding is that the really key thing during that time was that Devon Wildlife Trust really stepped up to kind of managing that beaver population and making sure that where there was any conflict with people, it was nipped in the bud and dealt with kind of quickly. So it didn't have a chance to become this a kind of big controversy. In Scotland, there's been it's not gone quite smoothly. There's been quite a few examples of beavers causing more problems for farmers and landowners, and we'll kind of come on to some of those potential issues later on. I think it's maybe just not been managed quite as well. But the fact is that beavers are basically here, in the UK now in quite some numbers. I think there's meant to be at least 1,000 in Scotland, and probably several hundred, I would imagine, in England as well. So we've got beavers back now, and we'll see where we end up with them. This is a map of the beaver trials in England. So you can see, if you look up at Cumbria, you can see Lowther. There's also, I'm not sure why there's two dots in South Cumbria, because as far as I know, there's one beaver enclosure in the south of Cumbria, but there's one on private land in South Cumbria, and then there's the one at Lowther, which is a bit more talked about. So you can see, they're kind of dotted all over England, and then the green blobs are the kind of wild living beaver populations that have sort of sprung up magically out of thin air, and they're the ones that are sort of mapped on there as well. So yeah, just going on to talk a bit about beavers and their the kind of habitat they create. I suppose this is a great picture, and it just kind of highlights how they can transform a place. There's this kind of damp pasture which has been drained, but it's not. I mean, looking at that, I'm not a farming expert, but it looks like it's mainly kind of thistles and buttercups. It's obviously still a pretty soggy bit of pasture in that top photo. It's probably not the most productive bit of land in the world. And in the bottom one there, you can see, look, how much water's returned to that landscape. It's probably going to be a lot more diversity in there. And yeah, as the figures show here, plant species richness has increased by 46% and cumulative number of species by 148. And that's not hard to believe. I mean, walking around our beaver enclosure here at Lowther, you can just see there's so much life. The woods are, a racket of bird noise in the spring. It's full of amphibians. There's all sorts of water birds that have been breeding in there on the ponds as well. And the aquatic plant life, you can see it really kicking off and changing every year as well. So our ecologist also did some work surveying bats in there earlier this year, and they found there were so many bats feeding over the beaver pen. And I'm sure any of you all know that have a pond in your garden, that wetlands are always just an absolute magnet for wildlife. So this is kind of how beavers live. You can see in this illustration, they live in a lodge, which is, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, you can see this chamber here. So they make this kind of sort of burrow or kind of chamber by kind of piling up sticks and mud and stones. And the idea is that they have an underwater entrance, so that water is their safety mechanism, basically. They love to be in or very near the water. That's where they're most well adapted to live. And when they're in danger, their instinct is to jump into the water and kind of disappear. So they love being able to go in and out of their home in through the water. They can hold their breath for quite a while, I think like 15, 20 minutes. And then they can come up into this dry kind of bedding chamber here, and that's where the kids be kind of when they're first born, they'll be feeding from their mother's milk in this nest. That's where the beavers are kind of hiding out some of the time during the day. And yeah, that's kind of the main beaver home is in the lodge here. And then they also build these dams. So it's very similarly to the lodge. They'll pile up sticks, stones, mud. It's quite amazing the way they do it. And they're really they get this like incredible perfect level. Like it looks like they're creating these infinity pools where water's just spilling over the edge, just like a kind of infinity swimming pool. How to get it so level, I don't know really. Um, and I have seen them when they're first starting a dam. They seem to start by picking up rocks and building like a dry stone wall. So it's like they know that stones are the strongest bit. I've seen these little lines of rocks, and then they'll start piling mud. And especially in our enclosure, they do a lot of dredging out the ponds and pushing mud up to make these mud banks. Then they'll eventually start throwing sticks on there as well. And they seem to be really strong. I mean, they've lasted for years and years, and they've transformed a tiny stream into a really amazing set of wetlands for us. So this is just looking at our Lowther beaver habitat here now. So it's an area with about a third woodland and two-thirds pasture. So one of the main things for us is it's really interesting to see how they interact with open ground with the pasture. And it's on a hillside, so it's sort of sloping from the top of the image down to the bottom. There was a very, very thin stream that was only about maybe 2 feet wide and a few inches deep, and it ran just along the edge of this woodland, sort of across the middle of the picture. And the beavers have basically started at the right-hand side of the image, and they've worked their way back up, just damming that stream again and again. And they've made a series of ponds as they've gone. So I think this whole area is about 25 acres. So it's not a massive area, but it's big enough for about a family of about 6 beavers. And you can see also here, you see the ponds they've made. You can see the main things I want to highlight are one that you can see where they've felled trees in the woodland up here. You can see that they've been here for 4 years, and the woodland is still standing. It's still very much a woodland. They've coppiced the trees in places, and you can see these kind of clearings up here where they've kind of walked up into the wood and felled some of the trees. But I think one fear people have is that they'll cut all the trees down, and that just isn't the case. They're the kind of right size population. The woodland continues to regenerate, and often it just structures it differently. So they cut a tree down and it resprouts and it grows back like a coppice tree. The other brilliant thing is you can see this kind of dark green patch below here. You can see how much water is spilling out into the pasture underneath where they've dammed the stream. So they're kind of redirecting a lot of the water kind of down the slope rather than down this kind of thin ditch-like stream. And that's been really brilliant. I mean, that's created a habitat, that I don't think I've ever seen anywhere else, really. It's like this very slow moving, shallow film of water, which kind of spreads out across the field in this kind of myriad of tiny little creeks. And it creates all variations of kind of marshy ground, kind of wet grassland, pools, and all the way through to just kind of marginal areas. And that's, from kind of the point of view of aquatic plant life and all the other wildlife that's trying to find its right niche. All that diversity is just perfect. That's going to really create loads of great habitat. Here's our ecologist Elizabeth kindly showing how big a lodge is. So this is our lodge. So we were just in the beaver pen changing the camera traps and checking the footage we used to monitor the beavers, and just passing by the lodge. It's just interesting to show how big it is. It's quite a substantial size structure. So it'd be pretty obvious if you come across one of these things, which it'll be hopefully possible in the future for you all to come across a beaver lodge when you want to walk. And then these kind of dams as well. I mean, it's our woodland is really a really complex habitat, and it's actually quite hard to get far enough away from a dam where there isn't other vegetation in the way to take a good photo of it. So I've just used this photo from this other guy, Richard Burden here, but this is very typical of how the dams we have look, and they're really incredible structures. They kind of leak all the time. So there's always this kind of flow of water through them most of the time, as long as it isn't sort of super, super dry. And it's kind of creating a pond behind it. Um, I've heard that beaver dams can also be, kind of an important route wildlife to actually cross wetlands in nature, which I can believe. Um, and then it's also, obviously redirecting all that water to create wet habitats below as well. And then just talking a bit more about the habitat that we've been able to create with the beavers' help. We have this herd of water buffalo as well, which we've had for about a year now. And they've been really amazing kind of habitat engineers in the wetlands as well. So this is the pasture below where the beavers are. So I was talking about that kind of flooded grassland, and the buffalo came in here and grazed it for a few months, the kind of back end of last year. And we hadn't grazed it this area for years before then. We didn't want to risk disturbing the beavers, but we kindly finally thought, we got to graze it. It's going to be better for the habitat, and it had some really amazing results. So where we got this kind of habitat with the lovely soft wet ground and muddy edges of this kind of shallow kind of wetland here, and all this lovely short grass. It was just perfect for lapwings to breed in the spring, basically. So the beavers have kind of helped create this by creating the wet conditions. The water buffalo have helped by grazing the long grasses short. And then we also found when we took the buffalo out that the grass was kept short by wild geese. So huge flocks of grey lag geese swooped down into the wetlands, and they just kept grazing over the winter, into the spring, into the summer, and that just kept the grass, quite short around the wet bits where the geese were loving to hang out. But they left some long bits further back, and that just created the perfect conditions for lapwings. And we had it's quite a small little colony of lapwings, but it's brand new this year. We've never seen them breeding there before, and they had really good breeding success. So of all the lapwing breeding sites on the estate, this was the most successful that we had this year, and they got quite a few chicks away. So it's great to see there that we've been able to do some good conservation grazing. We've reintroduced an extinct species, and we've created some great habitat, and that habitat is helping to support a really, a bird that's increasingly rare and declining really sharply, where we're really struggling to find good conservation interventions to help lapwings and wading birds from declining. It's created habitat for them to breed successfully, really successfully. That's huge for me. That this is exactly the sort of thing we should be doing more of, and it's showing how sometimes the solution to the decline of a species that's really struggling isn't super straightforward. We didn't set out to create lapwing breeding habitat here particularly. It was primarily intended as a beaver reintroduction to create habitat, but we didn't know what would use that habitat. But, we've put the missing parts of the puzzle back in, replaced the native species, attempted to graze in a more naturalistic way. We've got the natural hydrology back, and that rare species is doing much better as a result. So we'll keep monitoring that for the years to come, and hopefully, we'll have some really good data in a few years' time that's showing an increasing colony of breeding lapwings there. That's exciting for me. I'll just show you a very short video now of our beavers from this year. Some of you may have already seen it. It's very short, so we'll just watch it again. And this basically shows our two beaver parents, and also you'll see that there are some new arrivals this year as well, which will appear on mute. Brilliant. Well, hopefully that just gave you all a little taste of. It's nice to see them, and the kits are really lovely creatures. So I just wanted to go on from that to just talk about a few potential issues because this will be, kind of the main thing really. I think in the years to come, we've had all these beaver trials now around the country. We had the 5-year trial on the River Otter in Devon, and we've had all these enclosed trials all over England. And what is the next step? The next step is going to be hopefully beavers living in the wild on river systems. We kind of hope that that's something the government's going to put forward in the near future. But the thing that's going to come then with beavers being out in the kind of general river system and interacting with landowners and farmers and the general public, outside of kind of estates that have decided that they definitely want them, there's potentially conflict, and there's management solutions to that as well. So I think spreading the word about what can be a problem with beavers and what we can do to deal with it, and the benefits as well, of course, of beavers, and how ultimately the benefits outweigh the problems. I think that's a really important conversation to have. So hopefully there'll be a lot more kind of discussion about that in the coming years. So these are kind of the main things that I guess can be an issue. So they feed by stripping the bark off trees. They basically live off bark, certainly through the winter months. In the summer, they graze grass as well, and we sometimes give them apples and things. They eat apples and kind of vegetables and things like that. But yeah, I guess their diet is potentially one issue that they can strip bark off a tree. But if you like that tree, which your favorite tree, or it's if you're a forester and you're growing them for timber, then it can be it could be undesirable. They can help reduce the risk of flooding. So at a kind of catchment level, having this kind of natural flood management where the soils are healthy and there's lots of kind of natural vegetation, natural wetlands. Rivers are able to, the land's able to absorb a lot of water like a big sponge and slowly release it over time. And natural wetlands in the uplands where there's, maybe less human population, sometimes they're able to absorb some of the impact of the flooding and hopefully prevent kind of communities downstream from being impacted as by the floods. Beavers are a really important part of that. And the wetlands they help to create can certainly attenuate, some of the kind of sharp peaks of high rainfall. But equally, they do build dams, and that, if they build a dam in the little beck that's next to, your garden or your house or something, they can cause localized flooding that isn't desirable. So it's being aware of that and responding to it and having the kind of tools to deal with that as well. There's also some kind of discussion about, whether beavers can form barriers with their dams that are, that can impact the migration of salmonids, so trout and salmon that are migrating. There's quite a lot of evidence to suggest that they're very beneficial to fish overall, and through creating this mosaic of wetland habitats, they're going to kind of outweigh any kind of damage that they might cause to the odd salmon by making a barrier that's difficult to cross. We all, probably a lot of us know how good salmon are at jumping up waterfalls and barriers in streams and lakes. I think the one argument I've heard made is that our waterways are so modified. We've straightened and deepened and built lots of weirs and things in our rivers because they're so modified that beavers could the combination of those two things, really modified rivers and beavers, could cause a problem for salmon and trout that are already struggling quite a lot. So I've got an interesting quote from I think the Trout Association in one of my further slides to talk about that. And then there's this myth. The other silly thing is this myth about fish eating. So we'll just talk about that as well. So this thing with bark stripping in trees, you can see here, this is kind of the way of dealing with it. If the beavers tend to feed within quite a narrow distance of watercourses. So if you're, it's kind of here, it looks like a kind of park. Whoever manages this park has obviously decided they don't want these trees to be eaten by a beaver. So they've just wrapped some mesh around the bottom of them. I mean, it maybe doesn't look that nice, but that's one solution. Another solution is to you can paint like sandy paint or like kind of coarse, not very nice to eat kind of stuff on the bottom of the tree to stop it being nibbled. So there's potential solutions there, and I think this is the kind of thing Devon Wildlife Trust deployed. I saw it in someone's garden on the River Otter, and it seems to have kept a lot of people happy down there. And this is the kind of thing you can see sometimes. I mean, this is a pretty extreme example. A lot of the stuff beavers eat is very small branches, but sometimes they cut down a big tree. And ours have cut down probably, I don't know, 6 trees like this in 4 years, like big trees. So it's not like it's something that's happening on a monumental scale. But obviously we've only had 2 beavers most of the time. So yeah, they can fell a big tree and they'll strip the bark off. This is an example here of kind of how you can manage any localized flooding problems. So I'm imagining maybe this field behind here, the person who owned that didn't want it to be kind of flooded and a wetland. But you can see it's easily managed. You just put a pipe through the dam and you just drains the dam, basically. So it's really easy. I mean, it's not like super expensive, complicated stuff. It's, we know how to manage beavers. People all over the world are living alongside beavers, and none of these solutions are like super high tech. They call them a beaver deceiver sometimes, but you can put like kind of covers over them as well to stop things getting stuck inside them. But basically, yeah, it is very possible to manage the level of flooding with bits of pipe. The fish thing, that's a really easy one. Sometimes people think beavers eat fish. I think there's a lot of worry about people think because there's a lot more otters than there used to be, which eat fish. People think they might be harming fish stocks. Maybe they are. But beavers don't eat fish. Beavers are entirely vegetarian. They just eat, or vegan even, they just eat plant material. They eat grass. They eat kind of shoots of plants. They eat ferns. They eat bark. That's it. They don't eat fish. Apparently, this all came from Narnia. Basically, we all in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It says that Mr. and Mrs. Beaver were eating fish. So a lot of people have got that idea from there, but they don't. So the salmonid thing is really interesting. That's often the kind of argument against reintroducing beavers. This is from the Trout Trust, and yeah, their kind of overall take is they believe we should be reducing the cost of future management by making rivers fit for beavers. And yeah, I think the quote I got from them somewhere, which I haven't actually got on here, is that if we allowed a kind of buffer zone around rivers, a corridor for good wetland habitat for trees and scrub and kind of wet bankside vegetation, and this kind of buffer strip that wasn't intensively farmed along the side of our rivers and watercourses. That would give a lot of space for beavers, and it would give a lot of space for wetlands to spread out across that space, lots of little channels that might cut around the side of a beaver dam, and that's all allowing places where salmon and trout can kind of wiggle through. And they were saying, if we can bring nature back to our watercourses in this way, then it's the dream for them. That if our rivers are fit for beavers, truly fit for beavers, and we can remove these physical modifications, unnecessary weirs, we can re-wiggle them, we can allow them access to their floodplains and provide these buffer zones, then it'll just be beneficial in so many ways. We can stop kind of soil loss, run off into our rivers, hopefully, or prevent a lot of it. We can we can have good habitat with kind of shading for the salmon and the trout. They don't like it to be too hot in the river, so some trees and shading is good for them along the river. But also there'll be space for beavers to kind of live in habitat as well. And in the south of Germany, in Bavaria, they've got loads of beavers. They've got a really high density of beavers, but it's also a really intensively farmed landscape. And they deal with it by having buffer zones. Buffer zones are the future. That's the answer. We just have to basically hopefully accept that having some space next to our watercourses, which isn't kind of intensively used for farming or some other extractive purpose, giving space for nature and allowing these kind of natural processes space is going to be great all round. And if we do that, then there should be space for beavers and trout and salmon and everything. And I think on a case by case basis, if you could see in a certain river that was really important for trout and salmon, if there were beaver dams that were causing a problem, then you can remove dams. That's another tool in the toolbox. Dam removal is possible, and I think there have been examples in Scotland as well, plenty where beavers have been known to come out of rivers and eat crops, like if people are farming potatoes or something. It depends on different people's views, but I mean, at the moment, there's still lethal control in Scotland. People wish to shoot beavers that are a nuisance, and I think honestly that we we need a lot more beavers in our landscapes. But I think one day it could well be that there are too many, or that they they can't the landscape can't support a certain density of them, and it might be that in some places they're causing a massive amount of conflict that's really hard to resolve. And it might be that there's a sort of time and a place where, as a last resort, lethal control is the way. As with some other wildlife, sometimes you do need to do a little bit of management. Like with deer numbers, we want to grow trees, we have to accept there's be a certain degree of deer management. So I think it's good to have kind of these open and honest discussions about what's necessary and realistic. Beavers can be a nuisance sometimes, but they're also incredible. They have so many benefits, and it's totally worth it. But I think it's important that we just all, have a proper conversation about it. And crucially, that there's sort of a system in place for managing it as well. Because, is it going to just fall to the landowner, or is it, and is it going to be something that's sort of supported anyway? Is there sort of, you could incentivize farmers to allow buffer strips on their land where there are rivers, where beavers can live, and then they won't have to worry about managing them, hopefully. Or, is there other kind of people out there? Is there like a Cumbria Beaver Group or something? There is a Cumbria Beaver Group. And do they have maybe rangers that can go out and interact with people when they have a problem? They can pick up the phone and say, I've got a beaver problem, please help me. And they could say, yeah, I'm come and help, or they can tell you how to deal with it. So I think it's about having an appropriate level of protection for the beavers that they can live their lives, but also make sure that people can live alongside them without it causing any kind of crazy problems. And this is kind of an example of one of these buffer strips. You can see this little stream either side is this fields. They're obviously hay meadows or silage fields or something or pasture, but there's this strip either side of the river, and look at all that long, luxurious vegetation. That's got to be great for everything, isn't it? That's going to be great for all plethora of wildlife. And should be enough space for beavers to live in there as well. And that's the thing, really, I guess, to zoom out and look at is, sometimes maybe beavers, are hyped a bit too much. We do love to go on about how brilliant they are. But really, they're one component of a healthy river system and healthy hydrology. With all this other work we've done, about kind of appropriate kind of grazing, restoring wetlands, restoring rivers to their floodplains where it's possible to do so, and having all our kind of native species back, that suite of species and range of habitats. It's got to be going to be a brilliant thing for kind of climate resilience and hopefully stemming biodiversity loss as well. The final thing I'll discover is beavers' legal status. So they're a protected species in England now. So it's against the law to harm them, to destroy, where they live, their dams, their lodges. You can't keep them, can't transport them without a license, etc. So they're protected. So I think this is important. There aren't that many around, but I think the time will come where there'll have to be a program in place of how these are going to be managed. I think that's definitely something at Lowther and with our partners in Cumbria Connect and and with our Penrith to Kendal landscape recovery program that's coming up as well. Our kind of environmental work is expanding in the area, and we're very keen that should we have a wild release of beavers in the river catchment here in the future, there should be people with jobs whose job it is to pick up the phone when someone has a problem and go out and deal with it, and make sure that it doesn't become a huge issue, and that we can all live harmoniously with beavers and enjoy the benefits they bring. So I think that is it. I think it's question time.
Thanks, Joe. Amazing pictures. If you stop sharing your screen, I'll share mine. We have had some questions in. I was going to ask, how do you keep a beaver contained when they can bring down large trees?
Well, I guess it kind of depends on your definition of containment. If you were someone who didn't want to ever see a tree cut down, then beavers aren't for you. I can see that that's an issue. I think it's about recognizing that beavers are a native animal. They cut trees down. They've been cutting trees down here for you know thousands of years until we made them extinct. Them cutting down the odd tree, if there's the right level of the population of beavers, maybe isn't that much of an issue. If you're a forester or you've got ornamental trees or something, then I think that, as I've said, if it's a small number of trees, there are steps you can take to try and deal with that. And if say you were commercially growing timber or something, or you were suffering some sort of major commercial loss due to beavers, then absolutely, I think there should be a whole plethora of things that you're able to do to make sure that it isn't causing you too much harm. But in the end, I really think this is about giving space to nature. Like we farm whatever it is, like something like 75% of the land mass of England, and something like less than 2% is meaningfully protected for nature. So it's just about maybe saying we could have very, very slightly more land for nature and just accept that, that's the case. But obviously, if it's your bit and you haven't got very much land and you're trying to do something on it, then that doesn't help you, does it? So I completely get that. If I had beavers in my back garden causing me a problem, I would want to be able to do something about it.
Yeah, someone
Yeah.
asked, someone was asking if Lowther was liable for flooding on adjacent landowners' property and how that's dealt with.
So
It's
the
trial
beavers,
stage.
yeah. So the beavers at Lowther are entirely on Lowther land, and it's impossible that the beavers at Lowther could have any impact on neighbouring property. So our beavers
Mm.
are in a trial enclosed area, and the entirety of that stream is on our land, so it's impossible. If the government decides to release beavers more widely into our river systems to reintroduce them further, then that they wouldn't be Lowther beavers. That's the government making a decision to release a native animal into our river systems to live as a wild animal. So that's a further step further down the line. That's a decision for the government to make, basically. So as long as these beavers we have now are our property and they're on our land and they can't affect anyone else, basically. The answer to that.
Yeah, I suppose the thing is if and when there is an order for release, then
Yeah.
to protect the reputation of the beaver, so upfront is so important to have some compensation in place, and perhaps, as you were saying, rangers in areas where they can actually keep an eye on dams or impact on fish, etc. I just think it's really important at the point they're released, there's all that in place really to protect
Yeah,
them at that
absolutely.
point.
Yeah.
From what I've been
Yeah.
listening to, because we've had a couple of questions about obviously the impact on fish migration. People have got concerns about that clearly.
Yeah.
But it's a
I,
learning process, isn't it? I mean, we're reintroducing this species, so I think,
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously it's going to be a learning process, and there'll be a lot of. I mean, there's been a huge amount of research already, and there'll be a lot more to come from the relevant people, to kind of monitor these problems. And yeah, I mean, I understand that there's a lot of pressure on salmon and trout, but salmon and trout have lived alongside beavers for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. They've co-evolved together. They're meant to live in the same habitat together. The salmon and trout aren't disappearing because of beavers, which are recently reintroduced. The problems they're facing are way more systemic than that. They're the problems. We need to be addressing those problems. And yeah, I mean, we've got to be practical about it. If it is true that on a certain stretch of river, or a trout or salmon river, there is a beaver dam that's causing a problem, then yeah, I mean maybe it should be removed, or something. But I think it's always really difficult with these problems to, I think it doesn't help when you look at it through a single species lens. So, we've talked about beavers today and we're talking about salmon now, but we're really talking here about, we're in a massive environmental crisis. The background rate of species going extinct and the level of environmental degradation in England is off the charts. And really the point we're at is we need to ask ourselves the question, do we want nature to survive here? Do we want to give space for habitats and species to survive, or are we just going to let them go extinct? And I think there is, like, as I so sure that the trout kind of so I can't remember what they're called, the Trout Association or whatever they're called, the Trout Trust was saying, we have a huge problem with our rivers and waterways. We need to look after them and improve them across the board. And if we do that, there should be space for beavers and salmon and trout.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one final question. It's an amazing regenerative scheme at Lowther is incredible. I mean, is the funding right, do you think, for other landowners to replicate it? Or, I mean, if someone owns land and they're going after funding, do they sort of, is funding in the right place to encourage people to do the right things? That's my overarching question, whether
So,
it can be
I mean, at a
replicated.
national scale, no, I don't think it is.
Mhm.
I think, so the government started this 5-year trial, beaver introduction, and we really, I guess, need strong leadership from them on how we're going to manage beavers kind of nationally. But sorry, I've kind of half forgotten the question halfway through answering it. Could you
Well,
just
I was thinking if someone wanted to sort of emulate what you've done
oh,
on
sorry, the
Lowther
funding. Yeah,
Estates, if the funding's there in the
yeah,
right
yeah, yeah.
places for them to be doing the
So,
right
so we
things.
don't receive any funding at the moment, but we really think that it's something that people should receive if they're affected.
Yeah,
So what we would promote in our area is that in our landscape recovery area, we're currently building up our own agri-environment plans at the moment. And one thing we want to build in is reward for accommodating beavers on your land, or certainly for kind of accommodating wetland. So beavers would just be one component of that. So if you
yeah,
were a landowner and you had wetland or wanted to kind of recreate wetland, whether it was just a pond or a bog or it was beaver habitat, you could receive a payment for making space for that habitat on your land. And that's kind of progressive kind of funding that we'd like to see. But that's something that is in a kind of development stage up here. But that would be a great thing to see nationally. It would be brilliant, and
sure.
that maybe that could be part of a plan for kind of a larger national, kind of program for wild release.
And an important component of that is flood resilience, sort of knock-on effects of this kind of work is sort of massive
Yeah,
in terms of the economy, isn't it? Which is
yeah, definitely. I think those
immense.
benefits are really there. They're hard to quantify, but I think they're there. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Joe. I think we'll wrap it up there. We're on the hour. Thank you so much for your time. Amazing pictures. It's
Right.
brilliant to catch up. I've been to the site. I've heard bits and pieces, but it's nice to have it all brought together for the hour. That's awesome. Um, we'll wrap it up there. There's a recording that's been made, so we'll let all of you have a copy of that subsequently, probably next week at some point before the holidays. And just to draw your attention to the next talk at the end of January, we're going to have a bit of a geology talk, so a bit of a talk along kind of bigger timescales about the catchment and why it looks the way it does, and a little bit about the amazing geological sites across the area. So thank you all for joining us, and thanks to Joe. Thanks for your time. Fascinating. We'll make the recording available. We'll send you a bit of a Q&A for a bit of feedback on this, and see you all next time. Thank you.